Hello there, friend. Before we begin, take a moment to notice where you are right now. Maybe you're lying in bed, your head sinking into the pillow, or maybe you're curled up somewhere quiet. The lights dimmed, the world outside fading into a gentle hush. I want you to imagine, just for a while, a world without numbers. Not a world without mathematics as you know it. No, something far more strange. A world where counting itself has never been invented. Picture yourself in that place. You see 2 apples on the ground, but you do not have the word 2. You simply see apples. If there are more, you might think many. If there is only 1, you might think 1. And beyond that, there is no beyond. The idea of 10 does not exist, because your mind has never been taught to step stone by stone through the numbers that lead to it. This is how it was for most of human history. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived rich, complex lives without ever needing to name exact quantities beyond a small handful. They built shelters, hunted game, raised children, told stories, but all without the scaffold of counting we take for granted. It might seem impossible to us now. Numbers feel like part of nature, like the wind or the stars, but they are not. They are inventions, human inventions. The number 10, the very end of the fingers on your hands, is the product of countless generations of slow, subtle changes in the way we think. When you were a child, you may not remember learning to count to 10, but your parents or teachers might recall the way your eyes lit up when you first reached it, when you realized you could say them all in order. 1, 2, 3, all the way to that mysterious, satisfying 10. And yet, in the grand story of humanity, your personal journey mirrors the whole species. We as a people started where you started, with just 1. Take a moment to reflect on that. The number 10, something so familiar it feels as if it has always been here, is really one of our youngest tools. And to understand its story, we must step even further back, to a time when 10 had no name at all. Imagine lying in a park on a summer day. You look at your hand, 5 fingers, some creases in the skin, simple, ordinary. But now, zoom out, 10 times further away. Suddenly, you're a person lying on a picnic blanket. Zoom out again, 10 times more, and you're just a speck in a city grid. Another 10-fold leap, and Earth itself comes into view, a marble suspended in black space. Now reverse it. Zoom in 10 times closer to your skin. The ridges of your fingerprint rise like mountain ranges. Another step, and you see the cells floating like strange jellyfish. Another 10-fold dive, and you're in the microscopic world of proteins and molecules, then atoms, then the subatomic haze where even the idea of location starts to dissolve. This is the power of 10, the mathematical key that unlocks the universe in both directions. It's a concept so simple it hides in plain sight. Multiply or divide by 10, and the scale changes completely, yet the structure of reality remains. The idea became famous in the 1977 short film Powers of 10 by Charles and Ray Eames, which took viewers on a journey from a picnic in Chicago out to the edge of the known cosmos, then all the way down to quarks. The transitions were hypnotic, each step a reminder that your world is just one rung on an endless ladder. What's unsettling and beautiful is that there's no clear center in this journey. You might feel small when you zoom out to galaxies, but to a microbe living inside your bloodstream, you are the galaxy. Scale is relative, and the number 10 is the lens that lets us glide smoothly between these realms. It's also humbling. The universe doesn't arrange itself in neat meters and kilometers for our convenience. We impose 10 on reality because it's the rhythm our fingers taught us. Yet in doing so, we've built a mental elevator that can carry us from the unimaginably tiny to the unfathomably vast without losing our bearings. If I told you the number 10 was secretly running your life right now, would you believe me? You might think, sure, I use it to count things, but in reality, 10 is quietly embedded in every measurement you've ever made, every distance you've imagined, every sip of water you've poured. Welcome to the metric system, humanity's grand attempt to create a universal language of measurement, and at its heart, the number 10. Before the late 18th century, measurement was chaos. A foot could mean something different, depending on where you stood, and a pint in one town could drown or starve you in another. It was a patchwork of local rules, traditions, and awkward conversions. You couldn't build a bridge across a nation because every village used a different ruler. Then came the French Revolution, not just a political upheaval, but a mathematical one. Revolutionaries dreamed of a rational, universal system, free from the clutter of history. So they decided to build an entirely new way to measure the world, based on something unquestionable, the decimal system. 10 millimeters in a centimeter, 10 centimeters in a decimeter, 10 decimeters in a meter. Every unit stacked neatly on top of the last. It wasn't just convenience, it was ideology. 10 became the symbol of progress, equality, and clarity. You could travel from Paris to Peru and use the same measures. The metric system became the quiet infrastructure of science, engineering, and global trade. But here's the strange part. The choice of 10 wasn't inevitable. If we had evolved counting on 8 fingers instead of 10, we might be living in an octal world. Measurements might snap to 8s, not 10s. Your glass of water might hold 256 milliliters instead of 250. Your speedometer might tick differently, and currency might divide into halves and quarters instead of tens and hundreds. And yet 10 feels natural to us because it's what we grew up with. The metric system didn't just standardize how we measure, it rewired how we think about scale itself. Whether we're measuring the width of a pencil or the distance to the nearest star, we climb the same ladder of tens. Imagine a mountain shrouded in cloud. The air hums with silence, as if the whole world is holding its breath. A man descends carrying 2 stone tablets, engraved not with endless laws, but with exactly 10. Not 9, not 12, 10. Why 10? Across cultures and centuries, sacred traditions have often leaned toward round, memorable numbers. But the 10 Commandments in the Hebrew tradition weren't just practical, they were symbolic anchors. 10 wasn't merely a count, it represented completeness, a moral totality. To obey these 10 was to be in harmony with divine order. Religious scholars point out that the number 10 in ancient numerology often symbolized perfection of order, a full cycle that includes everything needed for life's balance. Think of it, after 9, 10 resets us to a new level. In the spiritual sense, it becomes the foundation of a higher way of living. And this isn't unique to one faith. In Hinduism, 10 incarnations of Vishnu tell the cosmic story of preservation across time. In Buddhism, there are 10 stages of the Bodhisattva path, each bringing the seeker closer to enlightenment. In ancient Egyptian beliefs, there were often 10 aspects to the soul's journey. Again and again, the human mind returns to 10 as a way to frame the infinite. The power of 10 in sacred law lies in its accessibility. You could recite them without scrolls. You could remember them without priests. 10 laws could be passed orally, sung, carved into stone, and carried in the mind from one generation to the next. And because of our fingers, 10 feels right. Our hands become the original tablets. But here's the mind-bending question. Was 10 chosen because it is divine, or does it feel divine because we evolved to count in tens? Is the number holy by nature, or by habit? Even today, modern lists mimic this sacred structure. Top 10 rules for life, 10 habits for success, 10 steps to happiness. Whether or not we realize it, we still borrow the gravitas of 10 to make our messages feel complete. Take a slow breath and let that sink in. Somewhere deep in our cultural memory, 10 still whispers of finality, of the whole picture, of the sacred. Imagine walking into an ancient marketplace. The air is heavy with the scent of spices, the chatter of voices, the clinking of metal. And somewhere, amid the trading of grain, cloth, and cattle, 10 becomes more than just a number. It becomes trust. The earliest forms of trade didn't use coins or bills. They used measurements. A sack of grain, a length of cloth, a jar of oil. But very quickly, humans realized something. Trade was easier if everyone agreed on a common standard. And almost everywhere, that standard leaned toward tens. 10 sheaves of wheat, 10 jars of beer, 10 measures of silver dust. The Babylonians famously worked with base 60 for astronomy, but in markets, everyday exchanges often defaulted to groups of 10. Why? Because you could count them quickly on your fingers, and no one could easily cheat you, at least not without you noticing. 10 became a natural checkpoint, A pause where both sides could agree the count was right. Fast forward to the Roman Empire. Coins were minted with values often linked to tens, 10 asses making a denarius. The denarius became so trusted that the very name echoes in modern languages: dinar, denier, even dime in English. 10 was not just a way to count, it was a unit of fairness, a promise sealed in metal. The idea extended beyond physical goods. In some ancient cultures, debts and taxes were also counted in tens. Religious tithes, the act of giving 1/10 of your produce or earnings, solidified 10 as a moral measure as much as a mathematical one. To give a tenth was to fulfill your duty, to be in balance with the divine. But here's the mind-bending part. By centering trade and morality around 10, humans may have shaped the psychology of value itself. What if we had counted in 12s instead? Would our sense of enough feel different? Would our currencies, prices, and even our savings goals shift? 10 is more than a number in commerce. It's a threshold. Below it, a trade feels small. Above it, it feels significant. We still feel this today. $9.99 feels cheap. $10 feels like a leap. Take a moment to reflect on this. How your wallet, your wages, even your sense of generosity might still be under the quiet spell of 10. Somewhere out there, far beyond what your eyes can see, the universe is counting. Not in words, not in numbers carved into stone, but in rhythms. And 10 appears more often than you might think. Astronomers sometimes speak of cosmic decades, not in years, but in powers of 10. The way we measure distance in space is built on orders of magnitude: 10 kilometers, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. From the size of the moon's orbit to the span of our solar system, these jumps by factors of 10 mirror the way we humans naturally scale our understanding. It's as if our counting systems have infected the way we think about the universe itself. But the connections go deeper. Consider Jupiter's orbit, just under 12 Earth years. It's not exactly 10, but when ancient skywatchers counted cycles of the moon to predict Jupiter's return to the same place in the night sky, they often rounded their observations into neat units, 10 years being a symbolic, almost mystical time frame. This rounding to 10 was less about precision and more about making the vastness of space feel human-sized. Even the sun plays with tens. The solar activity cycle, marked by the rise and fall of sunspots, averages about 11 years, close enough that in some cultures it was described as a 10-year heartbeat of the sun. These cycles affect not only solar flares, but weather patterns on Earth, subtly tying our climate to a cosmic count. On an even grander scale, physicists use the logarithmic scale of time, where the difference between a microsecond and 10 microseconds is treated the same as between 1,000,000 years and 10 million years. In this way, 10 becomes the ruler by which we measure the incomprehensible. It's tempting to wonder, do we find 10 in the cosmos because it's truly there, woven into the physics of time and space? Or is it simply because 10 is the lens we've trained our minds to see through, a product of 10 fingers and a human desire for neat order? Take a moment to imagine counting not seconds, not years, but light years, 10 of them, just a small step into infinity. Imagine your heartbeat. Now count to 10. You've just measured time, the way your body has been doing since before you were born. 10 seconds, roughly 10 breaths per minute if you're at rest. 10 fingers tapping, 10 toes pressing into the ground. It's no coincidence that we often fall back to 10 when we try to measure, relax, or steady ourselves. The number 10 is woven deep into the rhythms of the human body. Take breathing patterns. When you slow your breath to a count of 10, in and out, something remarkable happens. Your heart rate steadies, stress hormones drop, and your body slips into a state of calm. This isn't magic, it's biology. The vagus nerve, which helps control your parasympathetic nervous system, responds beautifully to slow, deliberate rhythms. 10 becomes a kind of built-in metronome for peace. Consider the 10-second rule in endurance sports. Coaches often tell athletes to focus on just the next 10 seconds because the brain can process that chunk of time without panic. Beyond that, stress builds. Within that window, the body feels in control. Even the way we walk has traces of 10. The average person takes about 10 strides every 7 or 8 seconds at a natural pace. Musicians and dancers have long known this. Many traditional folk dances are built on patterns divisible by 10, syncing the body's motion with a count that feels innately right. Then there's pain management. In hospitals, pain is often rated on a scale of 1 to 10. It's arbitrary, yes, but effective. 10 is big enough to capture the worst imaginable sensation, small enough to be quickly understood. On the more mysterious side, some researchers have noted that sleep cycles, particularly the lighter stages, often contain micro-rhythms of about 10 seconds of stillness or rapid eye movement before shifting. It's not a rule, but it's common enough to make you wonder if the number 10 is something our bodies just naturally gravitate toward. So whether you're breathing deeply, moving through space, or simply measuring how you feel, 10 serves as both a unit of time and a frame for awareness. Take a slow deep breath in, to a count of 10, now release it, to the same. Imagine the crackle of a radio in the dead of night. A soldier's voice comes through, calm, clipped, precise. Roger that, 10-4. It's just two numbers, but in the right context, they carry the weight of survival. The number 10 has a long-standing place in military language, structure, and planning. In radio communications, especially those developed in the mid-20th century, 10 codes were created to keep messages short, clear, and less prone to misunderstanding in noisy, chaotic environments. 10-4 means message received. 10-20 means location, and there are dozens more, each shaving seconds off communication in moments where seconds can decide life or death. But the influence of 10 in the military goes beyond the radio. For centuries, armies have organized their troops in units based on tens. The Roman military, for example, grouped soldiers into contubria, teams of 10 men sharing a tent. 10 tents made a century, and so on, scaling upward in neat multiples of 10. This structure wasn't just about numbers, it was about control, discipline, and psychological clarity. Why 10? In battle, simplicity is survival. Counting to 10 is quick, universal, and requires no training beyond basic numeracy. Even under extreme stress, humans can process and remember groups of 10 more easily than awkward, irregular numbers. Then there's the 10 Commandments style of military rules, concise lists of 10 directives for behavior, conduct, or readiness. From ancient warrior codes to modern field manuals, this format has persisted because it's easy to recall, even in the chaos of combat. On a strategic level, the military sometimes works in 10-day planning cycles, short enough to adapt to changing conditions, long enough to establish order. The number becomes both a rhythm and a mental anchor in environments where stability is rare. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about 10 in the military is how it balances precision with humanity. Numbers in combat can be cold, abstract, but 10 feels graspable. It's small enough to feel personal, large enough to command respect. Take a moment to reflect. Even in the most chaotic, unpredictable arenas of human experience, our ancient attachment to the number 10 remains a quiet constant. Picture this. You're sitting in a classroom, the faint smell of pencil shavings in the air, a test paper staring back at you. At the top, in neat handwriting or bold print, sits the number every student knows by heart, 10 out of 10. In education, 10 has become the universal symbol of perfection. Whether you're in Tokyo, New York, or Nairobi, a score of 10 means you nailed it. But how did we get here? The idea of grading in tens didn't emerge from nowhere. It's a direct echo of our ancient counting roots. Early educators, especially in Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries, adopted decimal-based scoring because it was easy to calculate and translate into percentages. 10 became the full mark, the ceiling every student aimed for. There's something deeply psychological about that perfect 10. It's not just a number, it's a promise. When you get a 9 out of 10, you don't think about the 90% success rate, you think about the 1 point you lost. That single missing digit whispers in your ear, almost perfect, but not quite. Testing itself has long used 10 as a mental anchor. Think about the times tables drilled into children. 10 times anything is easy, it's just adding a zero. 10 makes arithmetic accessible, predictable, and almost soothing, which is why teachers rely on it as the foundation of early math education. Even in higher education, decimal scoring persists. Language exams rate proficiency out of 10. Science competitions award points on a 10-point rubric. In sports scored by judges, gymnastics, diving, figure skating, 10 remains the holy grail of performance measurement. The perfect 10 isn't just a grade, it's an icon, but there's a subtle tension here. By framing achievement in a scale of 10, education shapes how we see success and failure. 10 feels complete, final, absolute, yet real learning is messy, continuous, and unbounded. This quiet contradiction means that while the scale is simple, the implications are complex. Does the perfect 10 motivate us or limit us? As we drift from the classroom into the next segment, we'll explore a place where 10 isn't about grades or gold stars, but about survival, a world where 10 can mean life or death. The military's enduring relationship with the number 10. Picture a world before clocks and calendars, when time was measured by the sun, the moon, and the changing of the seasons. In that world, numbers weren't just tools for trade, they were magic. And among them, 10 stood as a number of destiny. In the myths of ancient cultures, 10 was often the measure of completion. In the epic tales of ancient Greece, the hero Odysseus wandered the seas for 10 years after the fall of Troy, tested by gods and monsters, before finding his way home. It wasn't just a span of time, it was the perfect cycle of trials and transformation. In the Bible, 10 takes on divine weight. The 10 Commandments were said to be handed down directly from God, not as suggestions, but as eternal laws to guide humanity. 10 plagues struck Egypt in the book of Exodus, each more terrible than the last, marking the slow, deliberate march toward liberation. In Norse mythology, the world tree Yggdrasil is said to connect realms, and in some sagas, 10 was the number of key worlds or domains a hero might pass through on a great journey, each one a step toward ultimate knowledge or destruction. The number's power shows up in Eastern traditions too. In Chinese myth, the sky once held 10 suns. Their combined heat scorched the earth until a great archer shot down 9 of them, leaving just the one we see today. In that story, 10 represented the overwhelming force of nature, too much to endure unless tempered. Why 10? Because for storytellers, 10 was the number that felt whole. It echoed the human body's own tally, the 10 fingers we've used to count since the dawn of civilization. To reach 10 meant to complete a journey, to fulfill a promise, to close a circle. Even today, modern fantasy clings to the magic of 10. Quests have 10 trials, villains summon 10 guardians, and heroes wield 10 legendary artifacts. We may no longer worship the gods of Olympus or fear the plagues of Egypt, but deep down, we still recognize 10 as a mark of finality and fate. You're at a sports stadium. The crowd is silent. You can hear nothing but your own heartbeat as you step to the line. 10 seconds. That's all you have. 10 seconds to land the winning shot, score the decisive goal, or shatter the record that stood for years. In the arena of sports, 10 isn't just a number, it's a heartbeat, a countdown, a test of nerves. Think about it. In gymnastics, the perfect score, the thing every athlete dreams of, is a 10. In boxing, a fighter has 10 seconds to rise after hitting the canvas, or the match is over. In track and field, breaking the 10-second barrier in the 100-meter sprint has become the ultimate mark of speed, a feat so rare it turns runners into legends. But it's not just modern sports. 10 has been woven into competition for centuries. In ancient archery contests, hitting a target's center ring often carried a score of 10, the maximum proof of precision. Medieval jousts sometimes used 10 passes to determine the victor. Even in ancient Greece, the Olympics were timed and scored in intervals easily divisible by 10, a reflection of the same human counting instinct that guided trade and governance. Why 10? Because it's long enough to test skill, yet short enough to create tension. In competition, 10 is a cliff edge. You're either standing tall at the end, or you've fallen into defeat. Psychologists have found that countdowns in multiples of 10 heighten adrenaline. That's why stadium announcers draw out the final moments. 10, 9, 8. It's not just for drama, it's tapping into something primal. Even beyond scoring and timing, 10 is used to define greatness. 10 championships in a career? You're an icon. 10 straight wins, a dynasty, 10 years dominating your sport, a legend, and perhaps most tellingly, 10 often marks the moment of judgment. In diving, figure skating, or gymnastics, the score of 10 means perfection, no mistakes, no room for improvement. The number 10 becomes a crown, light to look at, but heavy to wear. Imagine standing in the heart of a bustling medieval marketplace. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. Merchants shout over each other, their voices a rhythmic chorus. 10 copper for a loaf, 10 bolts of cloth for a silver. It's not coincidence, it's commerce shaped by 10. Long before calculators, spreadsheets, or cash registers, merchants needed a simple universal way to measure value. 10 became the backbone of trade, not because it was the most logical base mathematically, but because it was the most human. Everyone had a built-in counting device, their fingers. A farmer selling eggs didn't have to explain complicated units. 10 was clear, 10 was fair. If a traveler could carry 10 apples in a sack, then 10 sacks became 100, and suddenly trade could scale from a village stall to an international caravan. Even currency began to reflect this rhythm. In ancient Rome, the denarius was worth 10 asses. In medieval Europe, coinage often followed similar multiples, with 10 coins or 10 measures forming a standard trade unit. Why? Because in markets filled with dozens of languages, numbers spoken on fingers were a universal translation. The economic power of 10 wasn't just about convenience, it was about trust. 10 items could be counted quickly in front of both buyer and seller. No trick scales, no hidden measures, just fingers, eyes, and agreement. As global trade expanded, this decimal thinking spread across continents. The East India Company priced goods in neat multiples of 10 for bookkeeping. Bankers counted gold coins into stacks of 10 before sealing them in bags. Even modern supermarkets with their 10 for $10 deals are echoing a practice that has been moving markets for thousands of years. 10 creates psychological anchors in commerce. It feels complete, round, fair. A price of 10 feels more tangible than 11 or 9, not because it's cheaper, but because our minds are wired to group around 10. From the clay tablets of Babylon to the neon-lit stock exchanges of today, 10 has been the quiet architect of trade, scaling economies and making markets possible. Picture the battlefield at dawn. A cold mist hugs the ground, muffling the sound of hundreds of feet shifting restlessly in formation. Somewhere in the distance, a war horn sounds, a deep resonant call that cuts through the fog like a blade. And there, lined up in perfect rows, are soldiers grouped in tens. It's no accident. For thousands of years, armies across the world discovered a simple truth. Humans fight best when organized into manageable, countable units, and 10 is the magic number. In ancient Rome, a contubernium was a squad of 10 men, sharing a tent, food, and duties. They trained together, marched together, and fought side by side. 10 was large enough to matter, but small enough to build tight bonds, a family within the chaos of war. Move eastward, and you'll find the Mongol Empire using the same principle. Under Genghis Khan's military genius, every warrior belonged to an arban, a unit of 10. 10 arbans made 100. 10 hundreds made 1,000, and so on, scaling the army with mathematical precision. This wasn't just efficiency, it was loyalty. Soldiers in an arban lived and died together. If one fled in battle, all 10 faced the same punishment. Why 10? Because it's natural. Even under stress, a soldier can count to 10 on their fingers without losing track. Orders can be shouted to a leader of 10, who relays them down the chain. In the smoke and noise of combat, clarity is survival. And this wasn't just about ancient warfare. In World War II, small tactical squads often hovered around 10 soldiers. Modern special forces teams, Navy SEALs, SAS units, still operate in groups that rarely exceed this size. The human mind, it turns out, can track and coordinate with about 10 people before communication starts to break down. 10, in war, is both a unit of trust and a unit of control. It allows armies to expand infinitely without losing the personal connection between fighters. From the tents of Roman camps to the yurts of the Mongol steppes, from medieval battlefields to modern urban warfare, 10 has been marching with us into battle for millennia. And in our next segment, we'll leave the clash of swords and thunder of cannons behind, and step into a quieter but no less strategic world, The economic power of 10. Picture a mountain. Its jagged peaks piercing the clouds, the air thin and cold, the wind whispering through stone. At its summit, a solitary figure stands, clutching two heavy tablets of carved stone. Those tablets, the story goes, held 10 rules. Not suggestions, not negotiations, but laws said to come directly from the divine. Whether you see this as sacred truth or ancient legend, the 10 Commandments remain one of the most famous lists in human history. They're not just religious directives, they're a crystallization of something deeper, the human instinct to distill morality into a countable, memorable form. Why 10? It's easy to remember. You can tally them on your fingers. In an age before written law was common, 10 was the perfect number to carry in your mind and pass down through generations. But this phenomenon wasn't unique to ancient Israel. Across the world, civilizations used sets of 10 rules or principles to guide behavior. In parts of ancient India, certain Hindu texts outlined 10 virtues: patience, self-control, honesty, and others meant to shape one's life. In some African tribal traditions, councils would create 10 key laws for the community, simple enough for every villager to recite. The beauty of 10 in moral codes is its balance. Fewer rules risk missing important principles. More, and the list becomes unwieldy, harder to remember. 10 sits in that sweet spot, enough to feel complete, but not so many that they're forgotten. Over time, these lists of 10 took on authority. They became more than memory aids, they became symbols. In medieval Europe, the 10 Commandments weren't just preached, they were painted on church walls, carved into cathedral doors, etched into the very architecture of towns. In schools, children would memorize them alongside the alphabet, linking morality with literacy. Of course, moral codes evolve. What counted as right or wrong in one culture or century might shift dramatically in another. But the structure of 10, that ancient habit of packaging ideals into a decalist, remained constant. Even today, modern 10 principles or top 10 rules echo this tradition, whether in self-help books, corporate ethics, or personal growth seminars. 10 is more than a number here. It's a moral container, a vessel humans have been filling for millennia with their best attempts at wisdom. In our next segment, we'll see how 10 left temples and scriptures and found its way into military organization, where it became a key to both strategy and survival. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a bustling ancient marketplace. The air is thick with the smell of baked bread, spices, and smoke. Merchants call out their offers, their voices blending into a rhythmic hum. Bronze scales clink, coins glint in the sunlight, and somewhere in the background, a goat is making its opinion known about the price of grain. Here, in this place of barter and bargains, the number 10 reigns supreme. Long before the printed bill or the credit card, trade was a delicate dance of trust, fairness, and memory, and 10 became one of the earliest anchors of that trust. In many cultures, goods were measured, counted, and priced in units of 10. 10 sheaves of wheat, 10 amphorae of oil, 10 measures of silver. It wasn't just convenience. 10 was universally graspable, a number everyone could count on their fingers, no matter their language. The Babylonians had their base 60 system, but when it came to everyday trade, smaller units of 10 made quick transactions possible. In ancient Rome, coins like the denarius were literally named after 10 because they were originally worth 10 smaller bronze coins called asses. In China's early dynasties, merchants often counted silk bolts in bundles of 10, making it easier to tally inventory on long trade routes. Why 10? Because it's simple, divisible, and fair. Give someone 10 loaves, and they can split them in half, in quarters, or even into tenths, without fancy tools or complex math. For traveling merchants, especially along the Silk Road, this meant that 10 wasn't just a number. It was a language of trust. Coins, weights, and measures based on 10 allowed strangers, people who had never met before and might never meet again, to make deals without fear of being cheated. 10 became a shorthand for honesty. But here's the irony. Once governments realized how useful 10 was in trade, they began to bend it to their will. Taxes, tithes, and tributes often came in neat packages of 10. A ruler might demand 10% of your harvest, your flock, your earnings. 10 was no longer just the merchant's friend. It was also the king's tool. And so in every bustling market from Babylon to Beijing, 10 became the invisible heartbeat of commerce, steady, predictable, and depending on who you asked, either a blessing or a burden. In the next segment, we'll watch as 10 takes on an even greater role, not in markets, but in the laws and commandments that shaped civilizations. For thousands of years, human beings have stared upward and tried to find meaning in those cold points of light. And often, they found it in the number 10. In ancient Babylon, priests studied the heavens with meticulous care. They didn't just see stars, they saw patterns, constellations, and cycles. Many of those cycles, from the phases of the moon to the movement of planets, were recorded using a base 60 system, but hidden within that grand scheme was the more familiar base 10, 10 degrees between key celestial markers, 10 days dividing certain lunar phases, 10 stations along the path of the sun. The Egyptians, too, tied their astronomy to 10. In their night sky, there were 36 decans, star groups that marked the passing of time. Each decan rose on the horizon roughly every 10 days, dividing the year into neat manageable segments. This was not just science, it was survival. Knowing when the Nile would flood, when crops should be planted, and when seasons would shift, could mean life or death. And then there's the Pythagoreans of ancient Greece. To them, 10 wasn't just a number, it was the tetractys, a sacred triangular arrangement of points that represented the harmony of the cosmos. They believed the universe itself was structured around perfect ratios, and 10 was the number that bound them all together. Even in the sky's mythology, 10 appears like a quiet rhythm. Some cultures imagine 10 layers of heaven, each one more distant and divine than the last. Others spoke of 10 celestial kings, or 10 guardians of the stars, watching over the world. When you consider the night sky as our oldest calendar, our first storybook, and our earliest navigation chart, it makes sense that 10 would become embedded there. 10 wasn't just a tool for counting, it was a way to anchor ourselves in an infinite shifting map. Next time you see Orion or the Big Dipper, try counting, not just the stars themselves, but the invisible steps between them. Somewhere a storyteller, or an astronomer from thousands of years ago, is counting with you, all the way to 10. In our next segment, we'll bring the number back down to earth, into the realm of trade, markets, and the first currency systems. Imagine sitting beside a fire. Thousands of years ago, the stars are scattered overhead, the night is deep, and an elder's voice weaves through the air like smoke. The story they tell is not random. It has a rhythm, a structure, and somewhere in that structure, the number 10 is waiting. Across the world's mythologies, 10 often appears like a drumbeat. Think of Heracles, whose famous labors numbered 12, yet originally, in earlier Greek tradition, there were only 10, or the Norse god Odin, who endured 10 nights of trial, in some sagas, before gaining his wisdom. In the Mahabharata, the great Sanskrit epic, we find heroes facing 10 rival kings, or engaging in contests that unfold over 10 days. Why 10? Perhaps it's because storytellers, like lawmakers, understood the power of a number we could hold in our hands, literally. 10 markers on a storyteller's fingers could help them keep track of events. One finger, one part of the tale. But it wasn't just about memory. In many cultures, 10 became a symbol of wholeness and completion in storytelling. A hero who completed 10 trials was not just victorious, they were transformed, having crossed the full spectrum of human struggle. 10 felt like the perfect arc, a beginning, a middle, and an end that lands with finality. Even in more modern tales, 10 lingers like an echo. The top 10 is still our cultural shorthand for the best, the most important, or the most dangerous. A countdown from 10 is the universal sign that something monumental is about to happen. Storytelling thrives on such shared mental anchors, and there's another layer. 10 often acts as a bridge between the human and the divine. A mortal who passes through 10 gates, 10 trials, or 10 visions often returns changed, touched by the other world. It's as though 10 marks the point where we've reached the edge of ordinary life and stepped into something beyond. Take a moment to think about the last story you loved, film, novel, or folktale. You might find that somewhere in its bones, there's a quiet fingerprint of 10. In our next segment, we'll move from the fireside to the heavens, where the number 10 shaped the very way we mapped the stars. Imagine a dusty city square, thousands of years ago. The air hums with expectation. A crowd gathers, not for a festival, but to witness something far rarer, the public reading of a new law. The stone tablet is heavy, its surface etched with words meant to guide an entire people. And how many rules does it contain? 10, not 12, not 8, 10. The number 10 appears again and again in the history of lawmaking, almost as if it were carved into our collective sense of fairness. The most famous example, of course, is the 10 Commandments, simple, memorable, and portable enough to live in the mind without written aid. But this wasn't unique to the Hebrew tradition. Many ancient societies favored legal codes and decrees organized in groups of 10, a neat mental framework for remembering what one could and could not do. Why 10? It may be the same reason our earliest counting systems were decimal. A set of 10 laws was just enough to cover the essentials without overwhelming memory. A judge or elder could recite them from heart. A child could learn them without a book. 10 gave structure to morality in a way that felt natural, like the fingers we counted on. But this numerical neatness went beyond commandments. In ancient Rome, the decemviri, literally the 10 men, were appointed to codify laws. The Greeks, too, had councils of 10 in certain city-states, trusted to make decisions for the community. Even the later Napoleonic Code leaned heavily on decimal divisions for clarity and organization. There's a strange poetry to this. Law is one of humanity's most abstract inventions, yet we've tied it to the same number that shapes our tools and our counting, as though civilization itself needs the stability of 10 to feel grounded, and perhaps there's comfort in it. A set of 10 rules gives us a sense of completion. Everything important is accounted for, nothing more to remember. 10 feels like a full circle, even though it's really a straight line from 1 to 0. Take a moment to consider the laws you follow every day, written or unwritten. Somewhere in them you may find the ghost of that ancient structure of 10, guiding you without your even knowing it. In our next segment, we'll see how 10 not only governed laws, but also crept into the way we recorded the greatest human stories, from myths to manuscripts. Hold out your hands for a moment, whether in reality or just in your mind's eye. There they are, 10 fingers, the original blueprint for human tools. From the moment we first grasped a stone, every invention we've made has in some way carried the quiet echo of that number. Think of the earliest counting devices, those notched bones and carved sticks we spoke about earlier. Most were designed to tally up to 10 before starting over. The Ashango bone, over 20,000 years old, shows deliberate groupings that align with human fingers. These weren't just marks, they were physical memories of counting on flesh and bone. Move forward thousands of years, and you find the same principle in more sophisticated tools. The Roman abacus had grooves or wires set to represent decimal positions, tens, hundreds, thousands. Even when cultures invented alternative counting systems, the decimal logic kept slipping back in, like water finding its way into old riverbeds. But it's not just in counting devices. Consider measurement tools. A ruler, often divided into 10 segments per unit, scales, calendars, dials. So many are built around the convenience of base 10. Even modern keyboards, calculators, and digital displays keep 10 as their core set of symbols, 0 through 9. There's a hidden comfort in that. 10 feels complete. It fits neatly into our hands. It rolls naturally through our minds, and it leaves a symmetry in design that's hard to abandon. Imagine a clock with 8 hours in a day, or a measuring tape in base 12. It's not impossible, but it's strangely unsettling, like a song with the wrong rhythm. And here's a curious thought. Perhaps the way we shape our tools has shaped us back. The more we designed around 10, the more 10 became our mental default. Over time, it stopped being a choice and became something closer to a reflex. Even in the digital age, where a computer's true language is binary, our user interfaces keep numbers in tens, because that's the way we still think. Take a moment to look around you right now. The remote control, the thermostat, the phone in your hand. Nearly all of them whisper 10 in their design. In our next segment, we'll leave tools behind and see how 10 slipped into something far more abstract and far more powerful: the laws and orders by which civilizations governed themselves. Think about the words you use every day. Not the big fancy ones, the ordinary ones, the ones that slip out without thought as you talk about your morning coffee, the weather, or what time you'll be home. Hidden in them, like fossils embedded in rock, are traces of 10, so ancient you probably don't even notice them anymore. Consider the word decade. You know it means 10 years, but dec is far older than modern English. It comes from the Latin decim, meaning 10. That same root whispers in decimal, decimeter, and December, which oddly enough is the 12th month, not the 10th. You can thank an ancient Roman calendar reshuffle for that little mystery. It doesn't stop with Latin. Across languages, 10 weaves itself into the vocabulary, like a linguistic fingerprint. In French, dix still means 10. In Greek, deca gives us decathlon, 10 athletic challenges. In Japanese, ju carries the same weight. Even in cultures that once counted differently, the number 10 eventually found a seat at the linguistic table, often through trade, empire, or religion. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Language didn't just record the number 10, it carried it forward, like a torch. Even when the original counting systems faded, the words remained. You might no longer count your livestock with pebbles, but you still say decimal point, without thinking twice about it. Words outlive the systems that birthed them, quietly passing along ancient logic to every new speaker. It makes you wonder, how much of what we think is modern is actually a relic of deep time, smoothed over by centuries of use? How many times have you unknowingly invoked a counting tradition older than your own country, your own language, even your own alphabet? Take a moment to reflect on this. Every time you say decide, you're using D, from 10, combined with minor side, meaning to cut, originally referring to a formal choice, often made in a council of 10. 10 is not just a number you count, it's a concept embedded in the way you think and speak. In the next segment, we'll leave language behind and step into something far more tactile: the way humans design tools, buildings, and entire worlds with the quiet guidance of 10. Picture yourself in an ancient marketplace. The air is thick with the scent of spices and roasting meat. Merchants call out their prices over the chatter of 100 different tongues. Somewhere, a camel snorts. You reach into your pouch for payment, but what comes out is not a jumble of irregular coins, nor a string of beads, nor a shard of silver hacked from a larger bar. Instead, you hold a coin stamped with a value based on a system of tens. It might seem ordinary to you now. Our modern currencies are built almost entirely on decimal logic, but for much of human history, money was messy. Coins could be worth 3.5 of something, or 12 to a dozen of another thing, depending on where you were standing. This made trade across cultures a nightmare. Then came the decimal revolution in currency. In some parts of the world, such as ancient China's counting rods or the Arab mathematicians' embrace of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, the shift toward 10-based systems began subtly, first influencing accounting, then taxation, and eventually the very coins in circulation. But perhaps the most striking example comes from a time closer to our own, the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The United States, fresh from revolution, decided its new currency would be boldly decimal, dollars and cents, each cent 1/100th of a dollar. France, riding its own revolutionary wave, followed suit with the franc. This wasn't just about convenience. Decimal currency was an ideological statement. It declared that trade should be rational, predictable, and free from the tangled web of old feudal coinage. It turned markets into places where arithmetic was not a privilege of the educated elite, but something even a street vendor could handle with ease. And yet, much like the decimal day we just explored, not everyone embraced it immediately. Some traders clung to the old ways, and certain regions resisted full adoption for decades. But unlike decimal time, decimal currency stuck. It was too practical, too elegant, and too deeply aligned with the growing global network of commerce to be ignored. Take a moment to think about it. Every time you handle money today, you're touching a fragment of this centuries-long transformation. In our next segment, we'll leave the jingle of coins behind and explore how 10 crept not just into trade or time, but into the very structure of language itself, hiding in plain sight in the words we speak every day. Imagine waking up one morning to find the world's clocks have been reset. No longer is your day divided into 24 hours. Instead, there are 10 new hours. Each hour has 100 minutes. Each minute has 100 seconds. Your workday, your lunchtime, your bedtime, all suddenly reshaped into something alien. This wasn't the plot of a science fiction novel. It was real. In 1793, during the fervor of the French Revolution, visionaries in Paris decided that time itself should be remade according to the purity of decimal thinking. If meters could replace feet, if kilograms could replace pounds, then why shouldn't hours bow to the reign of 10? The idea was elegant on paper. One day, 10 hours. Each hour, 100 minutes. Each minute, 100 seconds. Even the clocks were redesigned. Sleek brass faces marked with unfamiliar divisions. For a brief moment, Paris ticked to a rhythm unlike any other city on earth. And yet, it didn't last. People found it unbearable. Farmers still rose with the sun and set with the stars, not with the metallic voice of a decimal clock. Bakers still lit their ovens at dawn, not at third decimal hour. Sailors navigating by the heavens found their charts useless. In a world where the natural cycles of life are tied to the turning of the earth, decimal time felt like a stranger's dream forced onto the body of the planet. By 1795, the decimal day was quietly abandoned, surviving only in dusty revolutionary archives and a few odd clocks in museum cases. But the experiment left behind a haunting truth. Even something as constant as time is, in a way, a human invention. We choose how to slice it, how to measure it, and how to live by it. The fact that we cling to 24 hours instead of 10 says less about the impossibility of change and more about the weight of tradition and the deep roots of habit. Take a moment to imagine, how would your life feel different if the day truly belonged to 10? Picture a lone figure standing on a windswept mountain, stone tablets cradled in his arms. The air is thin, the horizon endless, and etched into those stones are just 10 lines, 10 rules, 10 boundaries for human life. Why not 11? Why not 8? When Moses descended from Mount Sinai, tradition says he carried with him the 10 Commandments, a list short enough to memorize, yet deep enough to shape centuries of law, morality, and culture. Whether you read them as divine revelation or as ancient governance, the number 10 is not accidental. It is deliberate. 10 is complete. 10 is whole. 10 is what you can count on your fingers while speaking aloud. Each rule linked to a physical gesture, so that even the illiterate could remember them. In a time when writing was rare and scrolls were costly, the law had to live inside people's minds, and the number 10 made that possible. This wasn't unique to the Israelites. Ancient Babylon's legal code, Hammurabi's code, though far longer in detail, was structured in a way that allowed key principles to be summarized in groups of 10. Roman law, too, famously began with the Lex Duodecim Tabularum, the 12 tables, but even there, subcategories often grouped into 10s for easy oral transmission. Why is this important? Because law isn't just about control, it's about memory. A law forgotten is a law that doesn't exist. And for most of history, before printing presses and archives, law lived in the mind, carried from generation to generation in the spoken word. The number 10 also carried a symbolic weight. It represented harmony, balance, and completeness. The Pythagoreans saw 10 as the tetractys, a sacred triangle of numbers 1 through 4 that when added together equaled 10, a perfect sum of unity, duality, harmony, and completion. So when a culture chose to put its moral code or its legal structure into 10 rules, they weren't just making it easy to remember, they were making it feel inevitable, like the law was written into the very fabric of the universe. Take a moment to reflect on this. The same fingers you use to count coins or type messages were once the measuring sticks for justice itself. Imagine standing before the Great Pyramid of Giza, stone upon stone, perfectly aligned, rising toward the sky as if to challenge eternity itself. Now here's the question. How do you plan something like that? How do you measure a dream so large it outlives its builders? The answer, surprisingly, often comes back to 10. Long before steel rulers or laser levels, ancient architects relied on counting systems tied to the human body, especially the hands. 10 fingers became 10 units, 10 lengths, 10 ratios. The Egyptians used the cubit, roughly the length from a man's elbow to his fingertips, and divided it into 7 palms, each palm into 4 fingers. But the way they organized the whole, the way they thought about scaling a wall or calculating a foundation, was almost always in neat human-friendly tens. The Romans too built their roads, aqueducts, and arenas with decimal-based measures. Their engineers used a unit called the pes, the Roman foot, divided into 12 inches, but construction planning itself often worked in multiples of 10. It was an easy, almost instinctive way to keep track of monumental tasks. 10 arches to a span, 10 spans to a section, 10 sections to a project. Even in medieval cathedrals where the math turned dizzyingly complex, the master masons leaned on a base 10 mindset for proportioning. They might measure in feet, rods, or chains, but the blueprint was still designed in human-scale groupings, a rhythm of tens embedded in stone. Why? Because 10 is memorable. You can plan in it, multiply it, divide it, and carry it in your head without a parchment scroll. A builder could leave the blueprint room, walk out to the worksite, and remember the proportions simply by counting on their fingers. And so from mud brick ziggurats to Renaissance palaces, the number 10 became a quiet constant in human architecture. Not because it was the most efficient mathematically, there are better bases for calculation, but because it was ours. Think about that. Every column, every step, every span in some of the greatest structures in history may have been decided by the same small act you do without thinking, touching your thumb to each fingertip in turn. In our next segment, we'll see how this same finger-counting logic didn't just shape buildings, it shaped entire systems of law and governance. If you look up at the night sky right now, what do you see? Billions of points of light, scattered like dust across an infinite black canvas. Now, try to count them. It's impossible, of course, but humans have been trying for thousands of years. And when they tried, they didn't just count one by one. They counted in tens. Ancient astronomers in Mesopotamia and Egypt, charting the heavens, grouped stars into clusters of 10, not because the cosmos naturally divides that way, but because our hands told us to. 10 fingers, 10 as a measure of order. From constellations to celestial calendars, tens became the scaffolding on which we built our understanding of the infinite. The Babylonians, for example, created intricate star maps that labeled each bright cluster with numerical groupings, and even though their main system was based on 60, they often subdivided the heavens into neat sets of 10. To them, 10 wasn't just a human number, it was a divine number, a whisper from the gods hidden in the constellations. The Egyptians used decans, groups of 10 degrees of the sky, to mark time during the night. Priests would note the rising of each group as hours passed, and over the course of a year these 10-degree slices mapped the entire celestial sphere. To navigate the eternal, they used the same scale as a child learning to count pebbles. There's something humbling about that. We reached for the stars, but we could only understand them through the lens of our own bodies. We shaped the universe in our image, literally. And here's where it gets stranger. 10 doesn't exist in the sky. Stars are scattered in every conceivable arrangement. The patterns we see, the constellations, the clusters, are a story we've told ourselves to make sense of what we cannot grasp. Counting the stars in tens is not an act of discovery, it's an act of projection. So tonight, when you gaze upward, remember that your sense of order is not the universe's order. The cosmos doesn't count in tens. It doesn't count at all. And yet we impose our 10-shaped lens upon it, hoping to tame infinity with a number we can hold in our hands. Next, we'll journey from the heavens back to Earth to see how 10 became the foundation for building entire civilizations. When you were born, the very first number that was ever used to describe you was 10. Not your birthday, not your weight, not even the hour you took your first breath. I'm talking about the APGAR score, a test every newborn receives, measuring 5 vital signs: skin color, heart rate, reflexes, muscle tone, and breathing. Each scored from 0 to 2, the perfect total being 10. 10 toes, 10-point grading scales in school, a 10 out of 10 performance review. Even in casual conversation, that movie was a solid 10. We've been trained to see 10 as the pinnacle, the standard, the ultimate. But here's the unsettling part. 10 is not an absolute truth. It's a human choice, a cultural habit, born from the same bones you carry in your hands. In a world where we had 8 fingers, you might have grown up striving for an 8. Where we had 12, perhaps a perfect 12 would define your worth. And yet because we chose 10, it quietly shapes your self-perception. Think about it. How many times have you been reduced to a score, a test grade, a performance rating, a top 10 list? 10 is not just a count. It's a measure of whether you belong, whether you succeed, whether you are enough. Now imagine for a moment that you lived in a world without numbers. No 10s, no scores, no perfect marks. Would you feel freer, or would you feel lost without a way to measure yourself? That's the strange paradox of numbers. They can liberate us from chaos, but they can also trap us in expectations we didn't choose. 10 gives us a sense of mastery, but it also defines the limits of what perfect means. So tonight, as you lie there listening, I invite you to reflect. When was the last time you chased a perfect 10? And did reaching it bring you peace, or simply push you toward the next thing to measure? Because next we'll leave the personal behind and travel to a time when 10 wasn't just a measure of self, it was a measure of the heavens. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing at the heart of an empire. The air is heavy with the scent of incense and stone dust. Towering columns stretch toward the sky, each one carved with stories of kings and battles. Somewhere deep inside the palace walls, an accountant is hunched over a clay tablet, his stylus etching symbols into wet clay, and almost every line on that tablet is built upon the number 10. Empires are not built on swords alone. They're built on order, on the ability to count soldiers, measure harvests, track taxes, and ration supplies. Without a shared system of numbers, an empire's reach collapses into chaos. And for much of human history, base 10 was the invisible scaffolding holding that order together. Consider ancient Egypt. 10 was not just a number, it was the key to its bureaucracy. Grain harvests were recorded in tens. Labor for the pyramids was organized into units of 10 workers. Tax collectors roamed the Nile, calculating the wealth of each household in neat increments of 10. Or look to Rome. The Roman army itself was structured around decades. Squads of 10 soldiers led by a decanus. Roads, aqueducts, and engineering projects relied on measurements that repeated in tens, making them easier to plan, replicate, and maintain across vast territories. In these empires, 10 became the rhythm of administration. It allowed rulers to project power over lands they might never see with their own eyes. They could know with mathematical certainty how much food was in the granaries of a distant province, or how many soldiers could be mustered in a time of war. But there's a deeper truth here. Counting to 10 didn't just enable order, it enabled ambition. With numbers, leaders could imagine something bigger than a single city-state. They could think in terms of decades, centuries, generations. 10 wasn't just a count, it was a vision, and that vision reshaped the world. Empires rose, not because their rulers were the strongest warriors, but because they were the best counters. Pause and think about that. The road you walk on, the bridges that carry you, the cities that surround you, all of them have their roots in the same simple act you learned as a child, counting to 10. But while 10 built empires, it also built something more personal, identity. And that's where our journey takes us next. Picture this. You're standing in a dusty marketplace, the air thick with the scent of spices and the sound of barter. Merchants call out in a dozen different languages, their tables piled high with grain, cloth, and gleaming metal tools. Somewhere a man is counting, not in whispers of prayer this time, but in crisp, practical words. 10. It wasn't religion. It wasn't philosophy. Here, 10 was the heartbeat of commerce. In the ancient world, markets didn't just exchange goods, they exchanged systems of measurement. And the number 10 became one of the great unifiers. Why? Because traders needed a shared language of value. Fingers became the first portable calculator. You didn't need a tablet of stone or a papyrus scroll. You had 10 tally marks right on your hands. A fisherman in Phoenicia might count 10 fish before tying them together in a bundle. A cloth merchant in Babylon might measure fabric in lengths that fit evenly into tens. The Mesopotamians, pioneers of trade, perfected base 60 mathematics for astronomy and calendars. But in daily markets, base 10 was simpler, faster, and more intuitive. This shift was powerful. Once you could count to 10 and start again, you could track inventory, tally debts, and weigh goods with precision. The abstraction of numbers became a tangible tool for survival. Think of it as the moment counting stepped out of the temple and into the street. Numbers stopped being only divine symbols and started becoming practical ones. And with that practicality came trust. Imagine handing over 10 measures of barley and knowing the scale was fair because both you and the seller agreed what 10 meant. A shared understanding of 10 built relationships between strangers, between cultures, even across oceans. In a sense, 10 became an invisible handshake, a quiet agreement that your measure was my measure, your count was my count. And once that happened, trade exploded. Goods could move further, partnerships could last longer, wealth could grow in ways that were impossible in a world without shared counting systems. Take a moment to let that sink in. The humble act of counting to 10 may have been as important to human civilization as fire, the wheel, or writing, but the story doesn't stop here. Because once people learned to trade in tens, they started building empires with them. What if I told you that the number 10 isn't just mathematics, it's a symbol of the sacred? Imagine an ancient temple at sunrise. The first light of day spills over stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. Priests chant in the cool air, their words carrying across the courtyard. Somewhere in those prayers, whether in Egypt, Babylon, or Jerusalem, 10 is whispered like a secret. In the ancient world, 10 was never just 10. It was completeness, a cycle fulfilled. The Hebrews spoke of the 10 Commandments, carved into stone and handed down on Mount Sinai, a perfect set of divine laws. To them, 10 represented the totality of moral order, the full measure of what it meant to live rightly. Across the desert in ancient Egypt, 10 held its own power. Some scholars believe the Egyptians saw 10 as the sum of the first 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, adding up to a pyramid of completeness. In Pythagoras' time, this sum was called the tetractys, a sacred triangle of 10 dots that was sworn upon in oaths. In Hinduism, Vishnu, the preserver of the universe, takes 10 incarnations, or avatars, each appearing in a different age to restore cosmic balance. From a fish swimming through primordial waters to the warrior Kalki, who is yet to come, 10 forms mark the story of creation, destruction, and renewal. In Chinese cosmology, the number 10 was tied to the 10 heavenly stems, a system used to order time itself. These stems were part of a great cosmic clock, guiding when to plant, when to harvest, when to wage war, and when to rest. 10, in so many cultures, was the number of wholeness. It wasn't a starting point, it was the end of a journey. To count to 10 was to arrive at a completion before the cycle began again, and this had an effect on how people thought about the world. If numbers were divine, then perhaps the universe itself was built according to sacred mathematics. Perhaps counting was not simply an act of human convenience, it was participation in something eternal. Take a moment to reflect on that. Every time you've counted to 10, you've walked a path trodden by priests, philosophers, and storytellers across thousands of years. And yet 10's story was just getting started, because in time, it would leave the temples and enter the bustling heart of trade and daily life. Have you ever wondered, did we invent 10? Or did nature give it to us first? Close your eyes for a moment and picture a seashell. The smooth spiral curling inward, tighter and tighter, follows a ratio that mathematicians call the golden ratio. But when scientists look closer, they sometimes measure growth in repeating intervals, 10 chambers in a nautilus shell before the pattern changes. Coincidence? Perhaps. But nature often whispers in tens. Look at a starfish. 5 arms, and yet its symmetry is double, mirrored, making 10 distinct sides when viewed in its full geometry. Dragonflies have 10 visible abdominal segments. Many species of flowers, tulips, daffodils, often grow their petals in multiples of 5, again bringing us to 10 when mirrored. Why does this matter? Because long before humans codified numbers, they saw these patterns in the world around them. Our ancestors didn't need microscopes or data tables, they simply noticed. The shepherd who counted lambs by 2s and 5s also noticed the petals on wildflowers and the shape of animal tracks. 10 became a way to make sense of repetition in the living world. Even in the human body, the echoes of 10 are everywhere. Our hands and feet, yes, but also in less obvious places. 10 cranial nerves connecting our brains to our senses. 10 primary systems in the body that keep us alive. It is as if nature gave us 10 as a kind of signature, stamped into life itself. And so 10 became more than a counting tool. It became a bridge between mathematics and biology, a silent thread connecting the order we see in ourselves to the order we find outside of us. Of course, nature doesn't always play along. The Fibonacci sequence, prime numbers in plant spirals, hexagons in honeycombs, these remind us that nature speaks in many numerical languages. But 10 is one of the easiest to see and one of the hardest to forget. As people noticed these patterns, they began to believe numbers were not just human inventions, but divine truths. 10 especially seemed to appear too often to be an accident. Perhaps it was the fingerprint of creation, and if numbers were divine, then counting them wasn't just mathematics, it was communion with the universe. From seashell spirals to the bones in our hands, 10 seemed to be telling us something, but to truly hear it, we had to start looking beyond the natural world, into the hidden structures of thought itself. For most of human history, the stars were beyond counting. They shimmered in their thousands, scattered across the dark, like spilled grains of salt. And yet, even here, amid the vastness of space, the number 10 quietly found its way in. Early astronomers often grouped stars into patterns, constellations, and lists. The Babylonians, who gave us much of the foundation for astronomy, organized celestial charts into neat sets that could be divided by familiar numbers, 10 among them. In ancient China, the 10 heavenly stems were used to track cycles of time and celestial events, pairing with the earthly branches to form a calendar that guided farming, festivals, and even politics. In Greece, Pythagorean thinkers saw 10 as a cosmic harmony. They believed the universe itself was structured in perfect numerical balance, with 10 celestial bodies, Earth, the Sun, the Moon, and 8 planets, one of them invisible, the so-called counter-Earth, to make the cosmos complete. Even though we now know this model isn't true, it tells us something profound. 10 wasn't just a convenience, it was a lens through which people saw the heavens. And then came the mathematicians of the Islamic Golden Age, who used the decimal system to make precise astronomical calculations. 10-based mathematics allowed them to chart planetary movements with a level of detail previously impossible, knowledge that would later help navigators cross oceans and map the globe. By the time of the Renaissance, 10 had become the silent partner in astronomy's greatest breakthroughs. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, all worked with measurements and calculations made easier by a base 10 system. The stars were no longer just many, they were distances, magnitudes, and angles written down in numbers anyone could learn to read. Here's the strange thing, the stars themselves don't care about 10. The universe doesn't divide neatly for our convenience. We chose to bring 10 into the heavens because it was the language we had built for ourselves. And once we could count the heavens in tens, we began to think about them in new ways, measuring, predicting, and eventually daring to leave the earth entirely. But before we reached the moon, 10 had another world to conquer, the hidden patterns of nature here on earth. Think for a moment about how often you encounter the number 10 in a single day. The coins in your wallet, the ruler in your desk drawer, the 10 o'clock meeting, the top 10 list in your newsfeed. 10 is everywhere, so woven into the fabric of daily life that you rarely notice it's there. This isn't new. For centuries, 10 has been the quiet framework behind ordinary human activity. In markets, goods were often bundled in tens. 10 eggs, 10 loaves, 10 measures of grain, not because it was the only way to do it, but because it was simple, divisible, and easy to keep track of on fingers while you haggled. In medieval Europe, many laws and taxes were calculated in units of 10. A tithe literally meant a tenth of your income offered to the church. This was not just spiritual duty, it was a neat, predictable fraction that anyone could understand without formal schooling. Before the spread of mass literacy, much teaching was done orally, and numbers had to be easy to remember. Counting in tens, 10 days of travel, 10 sheep per pen, 10 bolts of cloth, kept trade and household management efficient. But beyond economics, 10 found its way into the rhythm of time itself. Some ancient calendars divided the month into 3 decades of 10 days each. The French Revolution even experimented with a decimal calendar, in which the day was split into 10 hours, each hour into 100 minutes. It didn't last, but the attempt shows how deeply the idea of 10 had sunk into human thinking. And yet it's worth remembering that these choices weren't inevitable. We could have built our days, our trades, our measures around any number. 10 won because it was practical, and because once a habit forms at the scale of society, it becomes invisible. Think about that. Every time you glance at a 10-minute countdown, or buy something priced 10 for $1, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back thousands of years. A tradition born from the simple act of holding up 2 hands and counting every finger. But as 10 became the ruler of daily life, it also began shaping the more abstract side of human thought, paving the way for the mathematics that would one day describe the stars. Think of the number 10. It feels complete, doesn't it? Like reaching the top of a staircase. One step beyond it, and you begin a new flight. One step below, and you're not quite there yet. This sense of completeness isn't just modern thinking, it's ancient. The philosophers of the classical world saw 10 not merely as a counting milestone, but as a symbol of cosmic order. The Pythagoreans, a secretive brotherhood of philosopher-mathematicians in ancient Greece, held 10 in the highest regard. To them, numbers were not just tools, they were the building blocks of reality. And 10 was the most perfect of them all, because it was the sum of the first 4 numbers. They called this sum the tetractys, and it was sacred. It represented harmony, balance, and the underlying structure of the universe. Picture the tetractys as a triangular arrangement of dots, 1 on the first row, 2 on the next, then 3, then 4. In its simple shape, the Pythagoreans saw the blueprint of music, geometry, and even the heavens. 10 was not just a number, it was the number. The Romans, though less mystical, also gave 10 a place of honor. Their legal and military systems were built in multiples of 10, reinforcing the idea that it was the natural unit of order. A legion was divided into cohorts, each into centuries, each into squads, tidy multiples of 10 that made organization second nature. Even in cultures that did not share Greek philosophy, 10 often took on symbolic weight. In the Hebrew tradition, for example, the 10 Commandments served as a complete set of moral laws, no more, no less. In Chinese thought, the 10 heavenly stems formed the backbone of an ancient calendar. Again and again, across the world, 10 stood as a symbol of wholeness. But here's the fascinating thing, this perfection is an illusion. 10 is only perfect because we decided it was. In a base 12 world, 12 might have carried the same sacred glow, and yet once an idea takes root in philosophy, it shapes everything that follows. 10 was no longer just a way of counting, it was an ideal, and ideals have a way of lasting much longer than practicality. Next we'll see how this perfect number began to weave itself into every corner of daily life, changing not just how we counted, but how we measured the world. Imagine holding a lump of wet clay in your hands. You press a reed into it, making small, careful impressions. When the clay hardens, those marks will speak for you, carrying numbers across time and distance. This is how the earliest mathematics of 10 began, not in the neat ink of modern books, but in the slow, deliberate marks of ancient scribes. In Mesopotamia, long before Rome or even Greece, scribes recorded quantities for trade, grain storage, and taxation. While the Babylonians famously worked in base 60, many neighboring cultures were already experimenting with decimal groupings, especially when dealing with everyday goods. 10 goats, 10 baskets of dates, 10 jars of oil. 10 was an easy checkpoint in the long process of recording and calculating. In ancient Egypt, the decimal system took clearer form. Their hieroglyphs for numbers were built around powers of 10, one symbol for 1, another for 10, another for 100, and so on. If you wanted to write 3, you'd draw 3 strokes. To write 30, you'd draw 3 10 symbols. It was simple, visual, and logical. But here's the beauty of it. Mathematics back then wasn't abstract. It was physical. Numbers lived in sacks of grain, in rows of soldiers, in the dimensions of a temple. 10 wasn't just a symbol, it was a quantity you could touch. Even the earliest arithmetic in these systems reflected that tactile reality. Addition and subtraction often meant moving physical counters on a board. Multiplication could be as simple as arranging pebbles in a grid. And division, it might mean literally breaking bread or a bar of silver into equal parts. The power of 10 in this early math wasn't that it was more true than any other number base. It was that it was teachable. You could pass it to a child, a neighbor, or a merchant from far away, with nothing more than your hands and a set of examples. From here, 10 began to slip into the realm of pure thought, no longer tied to clay or pebbles, but to symbols and rules that could be worked entirely in the mind. That leap from the tangible to the abstract would unlock mathematics as we know it. And to see that transformation, we have to step into the world of the philosophers, where 10 was not just a tool, but a symbol of perfection itself. If numbers are like seeds, then empires are the wind that carries them. For thousands of years, the number 10 was just one option among many, a tool used here and there, but not universal. That changed when the great empires began to rise. Trade, conquest, and governance didn't just spread languages, religions, and laws. They spread ways of counting. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome. Merchants call out prices, soldiers count rations, architects measure stone. Everywhere you look, 10 is quietly at work. The Romans inherited much of their numbering system from the Etruscans, but through their vast empire, they carried it to lands that had once counted differently. Why 10? Partly because it was practical. The Roman army marched in organized groups, supplies tallied in predictable units. 10 was easy to scale. 10 soldiers to a squad, 10 squads to a larger unit, and so on. It fit neatly with the human tendency to group things by hands. But Rome wasn't the only carrier. Across the East, the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, our modern digits, began to form. In India, mathematicians refined the decimal place value system, which allowed for astonishingly efficient calculations. Traders carried this knowledge westward through Persia and the Islamic world, where scholars preserved, translated, and expanded it. When these numerals reached Europe, partly through the trade hubs of the Mediterranean, they collided with Roman numerals and eventually replaced them. Why? Because they worked better, and once a better tool exists, it spreads like fire in dry grass. By the late Middle Ages, 10 had become the default in much of the world, not because it was destined to be, but because powerful nations and cultures used it, taught it, and built their systems around it. If you wanted to do business with them, you counted like they did. It's easy to imagine a parallel world where another base system became dominant, where perhaps Mayan base 20 or Babylonian base 60 won the global race. But in our world, 10 rode on the back of armies, ships, and trade caravans until it ruled almost everywhere. And yet, as powerful as 10 became, its story was far from finished. To truly see its rise, we must explore how it shaped and was shaped by the earliest mathematics of civilization. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. For much of human history, 10 wasn't the universal milestone we think it is today. In fact, some cultures never even used it at all. Imagine a world where counting skips right past 10, where it's not the end of a sequence, but an irrelevant step, like a forgotten word in a language you never learned. For the ancient Babylonians, for example, the number system was built on base 60, not base 10. 60 was their cornerstone, shaping everything from trade to astronomy. Even our modern hour of 60 minutes and minute of 60 seconds is a remnant of their thinking. The ancient Mayans went a different way. Base 20. They counted not just fingers but toes, building an entire mathematical universe around 20 as the full set. In their world, 10 wasn't special at all. It was just halfway to something truly complete. In parts of West Africa, the Yoruba people developed a base 20 system mixed with base 5 logic, a hybrid way of thinking about numbers that doesn't align neatly with our decimal mindset. To them, numbers formed patterns of addition and subtraction that made perfect sense inside their own world, but to outsiders, felt almost like riddles. The key here is this: 10 isn't a universal truth, it's a cultural choice. When we say 10 is natural, What we really mean is that it's natural to us. For someone raised in a different counting system, our obsession with 10 would feel arbitrary, just as their systems might feel strange to us. And this raises a strange question. If 10 is not inevitable, what else about the way we measure our world is merely an accident of history? Would time itself feel different if we counted in 80s? Would mathematics as we know it even exist in the same form? In the end, the missing 10 teaches us that numbers are not found in the wild like seashells or stones. They are built, crafted by the needs, habits, and bodies of the people who use them. And now, to understand how 10 became dominant, we must follow the trail of empires, trade routes, and the quiet spread of a simple idea. Hold out your hands for a moment. Look at them closely. These 10 fingers are more than tools for holding, building, and touching. They are the original calculator, the quiet architects of the way we think about numbers. It's easy to forget that before paper, before writing, before even the simplest counting devices, the human body itself was the measuring stick. And the most obvious thing to count was right there, always with you. 5 fingers on one hand, 5 on the other. Many historians believe this is why so many cultures use base 10 or decimal systems. 10 became a natural stopping point. It wasn't an abstract choice. It was the limit of what most people could easily count without a prop. If you could hold it in your hands, you could count it. But not every culture stopped there. Some counted their toes as well, creating base 20 systems, like the ancient Mayans. In some Pacific islands, the body itself became a map for counting. Fingers, arms, shoulders, head, down to the other arm, turning the body into a living abacus. And yet 10 kept showing up. It was simple, symmetrical, easy to share and teach. If you wanted to trade, to pass knowledge to a child, you could hold up your hands and show them exactly what you meant. Here's the fascinating part. If we had evolved with 8 fingers, we might have a base 8 world today. Every number system you know, every price tag, every clock, every bit of school arithmetic would be different. Even something as simple as counting to 10 would never have existed. That thought alone is a reminder that numbers are not inevitable. They are human choices shaped by human bodies, and those choices ripple through history. Without 10 fingers, there would be no decimal currency as we know it, no metric system, perhaps even no easy leap to certain mathematical ideas we take for granted. So when you look at your hands, you're looking at the blueprint of our number system, a silent, ancient inheritance carried by every human who ever lived. But before 10 could rule the world, it had to compete with stranger systems, numbers that counted in ways we barely recognize today. Let me take you to a night, long before cities, before writing, before history itself. A small group of humans huddles by a fire. The air smells of wood smoke. The stars spill across the sky like scattered grains of salt. Beside the fire sits a hunter, holding a bundle of sticks. One by one, he scratches marks into a smooth piece of bone. You might think he's doodling, but in truth, you are witnessing the first act of counting. These scratches aren't numbers in the way we know them. They're memories, carved into something that will last longer than a day. Perhaps each mark stands for a kill in the hunt, or each one, a day since the moon was full. Whatever the meaning, this is no longer just one, too many. This is the beginning of keeping track. The most famous of these early artifacts is the Ishango bone, found near the headwaters of the Nile. It's over 20,000 years old. On its surface, tiny notches are grouped in patterns that suggest not just counting, but perhaps even an early grasp of multiplication. Imagine that long before 10 had a name, someone was already playing with the patterns inside numbers. But here's the strange thing. These marks weren't used every day. They were special, sacred, even. In a world where nothing was written down, the act of marking something was an act of power. To fix a moment in time, to hold it steady against the river of days, was to step outside the flow of life, if only for a heartbeat. Think of how different that feels from the way we count now. Today we take numbers for granted. They're on clocks, receipts, screens. They change instantly, invisibly. But for those first counters, every mark was deliberate, every notch mattered, And maybe that's why this early counting feels so mysterious to us now. It wasn't just about knowing how many, it was about remembering how many. And in that small leap, humanity took its first step toward the world of mathematics we live in today. From here, the path will lead us somewhere very familiar, to the 10 fingers that quite literally shaped our future. Let me ask you something. If you woke up tomorrow and every number above 3 simply vanished from your mind, would you even notice? It sounds absurd, but for countless generations of humans, that was reality. In many parts of the world, long before the idea of 10 took shape, people counted in a way so different from ours that it might feel alien. Some modern tribes still hold on to this ancient way of thinking. Take the Piraham people of the Amazon. Their language has no exact words for numbers beyond 2. They have Howe, meaning roughly 1, Howe, meaning 2, and anything beyond that is simply Bagiso, which means many. 3, 4, or 50, there's no difference. It's just many. Now imagine living in a world like that. You might hold 4 fish in your hands, but you wouldn't think 4. You would think many. You wouldn't say, I caught 7 today. You'd say, I caught many today. Quantity would be a feeling, not a fact. For those of us steeped in the culture of exact numbers, it's hard to imagine life without precision. We think of 3 as something carved into the very structure of the universe. But the truth is, numbers only exist because we decided to give them names, and without those names our minds can't grasp them the same way. Here's the curious part. People who live in one too many cultures aren't less intelligent. They can still tell if one pile of fruit is bigger than another, but they don't need to name how much bigger. Their counting system is woven into their environment, their needs, and their history. So why would anyone need more than many? That is the question that echoes through human history. For thousands of years, survival didn't require us to distinguish between 20 and 30. If you had enough food for the day, the number didn't matter. But somewhere, in some forgotten moment, someone wanted more than just many. They wanted to know exactly how many. That single spark born in the mind of an unknown ancestor would set us on the path toward 10. And before we can reach that number, we have to take the very first step into the ancient act of counting itself.